The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience. Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Jägermeister. Give your beer a shot this summer with an ice-cold shot. A Jägermeister. We're doing the DraftKings Millionaire Maker US Open Ownership Projection Show. If you haven't checked out the other shows, you should really do that. The DK cheat sheet is up right now on DKPlaybook.com, as is my entire course, stats, and field article, plus all the shows Thursday, Friday, Monday so far, picks, preview, props, everything you need to know about the US Open is in there, plus some giveaways, which I'll get to in a second. But joining me in studio is Eric Patterson from The Score, and on the line, Colin Drew from DailyRoto.com. Eric, thank you for being here. It's a long walk for you.
Yeah, a 5-minute walk right around the corner. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me. Excited.
Right. Drewby, what do you got at DailyRoto.com this week for promos?
Yeah, we got a Father's Day promo running for golf and for baseball. If you're interested in checking that out, the promo Dad will save you 20%. So it's a good week to check us out. US Open, though, pretty excited about that. Hoping to have as good of a performance on the ownership projections as we did at the last major for the Masters.
Yeah, you guys were dead on. And also, if people need to know, Colin, you qualify for the Thunderdome here, so it's extra pressure for you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not even going to try to think about ownership for the Thunderdome. It's too hard to predict in that field, but hopefully we can sneak out a min cash and actually turn the ticket into some real bucks.
Yeah, I mean, then you have to immediately hit the cash out option, because that's going to be big bucks if you do end up in the money for the Thunderdome. But we're here to talk about the Millionaire Maker. But before we get into that, I do have some DK pucks to give away in case you want to try to get some bucks to get into the Millionaire Maker. So for this show, you can like the episode, which you need to do always help support the show, or rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher and all those places where podcasts go. But in the comments section, please leave your two highest owned players below $8,000. We can kind of figure out what the chalk is going to be at the top, but it's this mid-range which gets kind of crazy. So your two highest owned predictions for players in the Millionaire Maker below $8,000. Leave your DK name, and there's another way to get into it too. You can watch yesterday's show for that and figure out how to get into that draw, or if you're on Twitter or Facebook, what you need to do is share the show on Facebook or just retweet. Don't quote tweet with the information, retweet, then send a reply with your DK handle and the hashtag US Open DK1. People have just been screwing this up across the board and like putting in the wrong hashtag, which is how I sort it to find the winner. So if you put in the wrong hashtag, you're not going to win. I hate to tell you, but those are just ways that you can get in. Plus, live chat where the winners will be announced Wednesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Reed Fowler on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Plus Friday, Cut Sweat Live is back. Me and Feinberg gonna be in studio. I'm guessing around like 4:30 p.m. Eastern-ish, maybe 5. We'll use Thursday to judge to see when these rounds wrap up, because you don't need us on rambling for like 3 straight hours. But as long as the cut is going, we're going to be here, top 60 in ties. Don't forget about that. Plus, we're going to finalize some picks today, get into everything. But Drewby, I want to throw to you first on this. In terms of the Millionaire Maker and ownership, how does it differ between that and some of the other tournaments that you're going to see, whether it's the 3 max, whether it's single entry, whether it's even the $4?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is in the Millionaire Maker, you do have some players who are entering 150 lineups. And so in those types of tournaments, they're going to be diversifying a lot of their plays, whether it's around a core or just trying to get a lot of ownership spread out and taking stabs at the top. So one of the things that happens then is you get a little bit more spread out ownership and less congested ownership in the Millionaire Maker than you would in a 3 max or a single entry. So if you think about someone like a Paul Casey, which we'll get to later, I think he's going to carry ownership in all formats, but I could see it getting a little bit out of control in single entry where you can only play, one guy in that price range. Whereas in the Millionaire Maker, people are going to be swapping him in and out with Fleetwood and doing some other things. So I think that's the biggest difference is in the smaller field, the ownership on the high end players, it kind of goes up by a little bit of a multiplier, anywhere from 1.5 to 2x.
All right, so one thing that I think we should kind of get out of the way at the beginning, we're not saying you can't play the highest owned guys. I think that's where people kind of swerve a little bit. This is like, oh, if Dustin Johnson's going to be the highest owned guy, does that mean I can't play Dustin Johnson? It's like, no, you can play Dustin Johnson, especially if you think he's going to win. And in the US Open, where The finishing points are probably going to be a bit more than like the Masters for the Millionaire Maker, where there are going to be fewer birdie streaks, fewer eagles, that kind of thing, that you're going to have guys at the very top of the board. So just because someone's highly owned doesn't mean you don't need to take them, and you don't need to go contrarian with every single spot. But like, Eric, what would you do for like, if you had like 4 chalk guys? Would you then go out of your way to find like 2 other guys that are a bit lower in the percentages?
Well, I mean, if it depends really where you're eating that chalk. If it's at the top, there's going to be tons of different places throughout the board to differentiate. One way is to build contrarian stack type lineups. I mean, if the narrative this week is distance, distance, distance. So if you just want to start building lineups where you have more accuracy guys, more guys who are good at scrambling, putting, I think that's a good way to build lineups as well. Obviously looking at wind conditions, because that's a big talking point as well this week. A lot of people, especially in the Millie Maker, aren't going to be looking at the wind conditions. That's just not something a lot of casual players look at. So if you're building AM, PM stacks, stuff of that nature, that's a good way to eat chalk as well as differentiate.
Yeah, so Drewby, like, what do you suggest people do? Because I know like the common thing is like leaving money on the table, but I don't think in a tournament like this, even with soft pricing, that you want to leave too much on the table. Like if you leave 100 or 200, that's probably enough, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like $300 pretty much gets you out of the range where you're duplicating lineups. And when people talk about leaving money on the table, that's really all they're trying to do there is just avoid duplicating the lineups. There are different ways you can do that. You could think about the total ownership of your roster as a whole to try to avoid duplicates, or you can just leave the money on the table. I think the ownership of the individual players still matters, though, even if you are avoiding duplicates and leaving money on the table. You're trying to generate leverage when, you know, one of your guys does something really well. And so I think that is one of the reasons that people are looking for pivots. But like you said, you're not just fading someone just because of ownership. It's all about their probabilities to do well, how that compares to the ownership, and then the other options that are priced around them. So I think you see examples like Dustin Johnson last week was going to carry the same ownership that he is at the same price in this week's field in the FedEx St. Jude Classic. And so that was an example where he seemed like a really strong play despite the high ownership levels.
All right, well, let's talk about Dustin and all the guys above the $10,000 level. It's Dustin, Rory, Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth, Jason Day, and Ricky Fowler. So I'm guessing, if we're doing ownership guesses, that Dustin is by far the highest owned guy here. You can still construct pretty decent lineups at 11-7 here. Like when you get into that lower $7,000 level, there's still quality guys. So I think he's far and away number 1, but I'm having a tough time trying to figure out who's number 2. I mean, in my personal preferences for plays, I like Justin Thomas second best of this group, but I don't know if he's going to carry the ownership Jason Day or Ricky Fowler is. What are your early numbers saying, Drewby?
I think that you're right with JT carrying the second highest ownership of this group. I agree with you. DJ is going to be the number 1 owned guy. The only question is whether he's, 25% or 30% and how that varies based on game type. But I think, people who aren't going to play Rory because you can just find the $200, but JT offers a little bit of savings. And I think with the length narratives going into the course for the US Open, and obviously JT's track record winning, a couple events this year. And I think he's going to carry around 20% ownership. It seems like there's enough to sour people on the other golfers in this range, outside of anything that changes with regards to tee times later in the week on Wednesday.
What do you think, Eric? Highest, lowest?
Highest owned, definitely Dustin Johnson. It sucks that he it doesn't suck, but it was cool to see him walk off with that eagle. But I think, it was seen by everyone pretty much, and they just know he won last week. He's coming into a tournament he's dominated at the past. So DJ will definitely be the highest owned. Lowest owned, it's going to be, I'm gonna guess Rory McIlroy, just because he is that $200 cheaper than DJ, who is the highest owned. And then throughout the rest of the 10K plus range, it's going to be pretty spread out between Dave, Fowler, JT. And even though Spieth hasn't been playing as well as he's supposed to be, I think just the name and then just the talk around him, he's just going to get that ownership regardless.
Yeah, well, this is a really tough one because, like, when you look at some of the tags, Colin, that, like, people are like, oh, you can't play Spieth. You can't play Spieth. He's too overpriced. But then the narrative switches to, well, no one's going to play Jordan Spieth, so I better play Jordan Spieth because he's going to be super low owned. And then by the time we see the numbers come, tournament lock, that he's like 12% or something like that, not the 6% everyone was hoping for.
Yeah, and this is the Millionaire Maker show. It's rare that you're going to get one of these guys at single-digit ownership percentages. I just don't think that's going to happen.
I think that Rory will come in with single-digit ownership
in the Millionaire Maker.
Yeah,
maybe. I guess I have him close to 10%, so I guess that's fair if you want to take the under. I would probably lean slightly to the over, but I agree with you on Spieth. I think it just takes one little, social media clip or hype clip about him finding something, and all of a sudden people are ready to pile back on him. So Spieth, I think Fowler could end up maybe being the forgotten man of this range outside of Rory McIlroy.
So do you think that Fowler goes lesser owned than Spieth does?
I do, yeah. I think with just Spieth's overall pedigree and the track record, that people will find the money to get up to Spieth more than they will pay for Fowler.
All right, so Eric, give me a guess on Dustin Johnson ownership in the Millie.
I'm not like the biggest ownership projection guy, but I will say 27%.
See, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say 27%. What do you got coming out of this, Colin?
Yeah, I got about 25.5% right now. I think that's all fair. The only thing that keeps it down a little bit is the salary, just because it is still a little bit hard to build lineups with him. Like building 100 lineups or something all around DJ, you'd have to do some pretty weird things. So I think that's one of the things to think about if you are building Dustin Johnson lineups, which I'm certain I'll have some, is trying to make sure that I'm not just building the same way as everybody else by starting with DJ, going to Casey and Fleetwood, and then going to the other chalk down below.
I mean, I'm using more ROM than I'm using DJ, but I did build a few DJ ROM lineups, and it's the bottom end is kind of terrifying.
It's a little grimy. Yeah, it's certainly, there's a couple names down there, but you got to take some flyers. And it's one of the things, I mean, you got to be building a multiple lineups, I feel like, to feel comfortable with that approach. If you're building one, you're probably not, comfortable slotting in some of these $6,700 guys.
All right, let's give a Justin Thomas guess here then. I'm going to say 18% for Justin Thomas.
I'll go 17.5.
17. You're gonna scumbag prices right in here with the under. What do you got, Colin?
$1.
I'll squeeze you with 19%.
So I mean, I just find it hard to believe that if we're going like 25 for DJ, close to 20 for Thomas, that Rory would somehow come in above 10%. Like it just, and I just think that casual people, and like Eric, you mentioned, like people saw that walk-off eagle, that they'll find the $200 to get up to DJ and just. And what is? I mean, Rory's played really well. And I think that kind of gets forgotten in all of this. So does that mean, like, in the Millionaire Maker build, if we do think that maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 8%, maybe it's 12%, whatever it is, we know that he's going to be the lowest owned of the top three guys. Does that mean we should really consider Rory as the pivot play up here?
I think he's a pretty decent pivot play. One of the metrics I like to use is to create a leverage score, which compares the top 20 odds of the golfer to the ownership projections. And Rory actually does have the best leverage score right now based on our current ownership projections, which is, I think, makes him a good large field GPP play. I'd still have a little bit of a trouble coming around to him in maybe smaller field formats, just because the price is prohibitive. And there are ways to build rosters that avoid kind of all of these top end plays and allow you to feel really good about all six guys that you're putting onto your team.
Like I like Dustin objectively the best of these guys coming in, but I'll probably end up owning more Justin Thomas because of the lower ownership and just the price point. Like I can do more with my lineup with Justin Thomas, and I wasn't planning on playing any Rory, just like everybody else. But if I'm going to get into this situation, like would it make sense to diversify my Dustin shares into some Rory too, even if it means I have to take down my Dustin exposure from like 20% to 15% just to get 5% of Rory to hedge myself out at the top? Or if I'm only playing 25 lineups, let's say, is that just not necessary, do you think?
Yeah, I think when you're playing like 25 lineups, it makes sense to just kind of go with your gut and go with the guys that you really think are going to perform. Or, if you want to play DJ, you want to cheer for DJ, go for it. But if you're going to go 150 lineups into either the Millie Maker or even the Quarter Arcade that they have now, I think it's good strategy to actually put 10, 15% of your lineups towards Rory McIlroy and just kind of differentiate that way. Yeah,
so when I'm building my core around these top guys, Colin, like how should I be looking at it, and how much does it depend on how many lineups I play?
Well, obviously, if you only play one lineup, then you're kind of stuck with your decision making there. But if you're building multiple lineups, one of the things that I try to look at on a week-to-week basis is the different areas that you could make mistakes or win like GPPs. And as far as like the DraftKings community as a whole or the DFS market doing something that's inefficient, I think the ownership at the top is shaking out the way it should. So I don't think, from a process perspective, I don't think you're really generating a ton of leverage or really beating the field with like your decision above 10K. I think a lot of the mistakes are going to be made, at least as far as like overall ownership in some of the lower price ranges. So I think if I was building 50, rosters, like I'd probably want some Rory exposure. I'd probably want DJ in, 25 or 30% of my lineups though too. And I would probably then lean on the other price ranges to try to, win on the rest of my lineups with the 5 other golfers.
All right, let's go around the horn here. Eric, we'll start with you. Colin, we'll go to you. Give me a number. Jordan Spieth ownership, I'll say 12%.
We're thinking along the same line here. I'll go 11, 10%. I think just above Rory, but definitely in the double digits.
Colin?
Yeah, I think he'll be like 13, 14 by the time lock hits.
Jason Day, I'm going to go 17%. I feel like there's building momentum for Jason Day here.
I'll go 15 with Day.
Yeah, 15 sounds good to me. I think the strokes gained tee to green metrics will keep some people off of him a little bit, just because that's, people in general, I think, are a little sour on Day 2 with his, fever and back injuries and all that.
I mean, let's say it comes out very late on Wednesday night that Jason Day has something. He had to withdraw from like going to his hotel room or switch hotel room because it was giving him a headache or something. Does that mean you instantly have to put him in? Because every time this happens, he wins the tournament.
It seems like there's some correlation there. So, I mean, I think at that point, you'd have to be a little fearful if you didn't have any Day exposure.
Fowler, for me, I'm going to go 13%.
I think Fowler actually gains a little more popularity just because he's the cheapest in this price range. So I'll go pretty close to Day with 15, 16%.
I'll go 12.5 on Ricky. I think he'll be a little bit lower. I like all this stuff's pretty close, so we seem pretty aligned. I don't think people are making any egregious decisions with the ownership and the way it's shaking out this week in this range.
So of like the top 5 in overall ownership from this tournament, I think of the 10K plus guys, only DJ gets into that mix of actual top 5 overall owned.
Yeah, I think that's probably Justin Thomas might be close. It kind of depends how the chalk congregates in other areas, but I agree it's possible DJ's the only guy, with maybe JT kind of somewhere between the 6th and 10th highest owned golfer.
All right, I do want to tell everyone right now about FantasyNational.com. If you go to FantasyNational.com right now, get yourself a weekly membership. Go test it out because it's a great time to put all the tools to good use, like the ownership projections, the event simulators, the giant customizable stat database. You're a member, right?
I'm a member since day one.
You're a founding member.
One of them, yeah.
Do you use it in your process throughout the week?
Every week, yeah. I wouldn't be able to write articles, research, make lineups without it.
Yeah, so it has every tool you'll need, and you can customize it. Like there's POA this week, there's firm greens this week. If you want to use the mixed condition model, you can build all of that into it and then look at everything as a whole. So FantasyNational.com. Now, I gave away a free yearly membership earlier this week, and maybe for the next major I'll do the same thing, but it's best off that you get in now, try to use it, because there's a lot of money at stake on DraftKings this week, and even in the gambling market. If you live in a place where you can legally gamble, the betting odds are up there too, and you can use the same information to try to process everything. What's your favorite date range to search by the way?
I'm like a big 24 round kind of guy. I think that brings in like maybe 2 or 3 months worth of data.
Yeah, it depends on, I like to look at like the rolling stats on everything. So I like to see where guys are at now versus where they were at like 100 rounds ago or even all time. Colin, I know you guys through Daily Roto and at Data Golf kind of do the same thing, the long-term adjusted strokes gain. Can you explain that to people a little bit and why that's really important to give almost a longer form look at some of this stuff?
Yeah, it's just one of the things that they've found is a lot more predictive as far as the future performance. And that's one of the things Data Golf does a really good job with is kind of back testing the predictiveness of all the different models. So our probability models do weight, though, the long-term and short-term form. And the approach they take is a little less course specific. I think they found that course fit does matter a little bit, but maybe is something that is sometimes overrated as far as the narratives that go into it, particularly among the top golfers in the world who really can win anywhere. And so the long-term adjusted round is basically the performance of the golfer adjusted for the course that they're playing, and then the quality of the field too is something that isn't always adjusted in strokes gain metrics. So sometimes you'll find guys that did well during the swing season with really weak fields that have inflated strokes gained metrics for the rest of the season.
How dare you shit on my Brendan Steele pick?
Brendan Steele would, be one of those guys who may be a little inflated, but obviously the stuff that you guys have over at Fantasy National as far as the custom models and the ability to weight, I think, the individual stats differently over different time periods. So being able to take a longer term view at someone's putting, but maybe a shorter term view at their tee to green game, I think is a really big asset if you are somebody who likes to play with the individual stats and try to weight those differently.
Well, one of the things that can influence ownership, besides people just looking at the prices, that's one thing. World ranking, recent performance are all things that are baked into it. But I think stats actually does play a factor in this. And Eric, you were saying like the narrative around this week is people are taking bombers. Now, I actually think it's not a bad idea. I'm targeting not just driving distance, but I think that even looking at strokes gained off the tee and being able to look at like fairways gained and driving distance gained and being able to parse that a little bit, I think a combination of both is probably where you need. But if the wind picks up, like some of these holes are going to be tough to play if you can't hit it a mile. But I think that's going to influence a lot of people too as it pertains to ownership. Like when we get down to our Finaus or even Luke List or hell, Trey Mullinick, Gary Woodland, like these types of guys, hey, if they bomb it, we got to take them. That inflates their ownership a little bit. Do you see driving distance being the thing that's driving the ownership this week?
100%. I mean, when you talk about all the guys at the top, you talk about driving distance. That's why DJ, Rory, and all that are high. So that's just going to trickle down throughout the rest of the DraftKings pricing. And you're seeing that with early trends on fan share. Guys like Steele, guys like Woodland are getting talked up a bunch just because, they hit the ball over 320 yards, which is obviously going to help. But there's going to be scenarios where, guys who hit fairways, guys who are good around the greens are going to succeed. And we saw that last year too. It wasn't just distance.
Yeah, do you think that, stacking your teams together, Colin, with like different stats, like, hey, I'll take a driving team, I'll take an approach team, I'll take a short game team, an all putting team. But do you think that driving distance is the one thing that people are really keying on this week?
So with the stacked approach, I think it's a really interesting one. It's not one that I've done a lot personally, but I know Ben Raza, who's on your show a lot, Jazz Raz, does that, and he's obviously a very successful player. I think that people still tend to use the strokes gained metrics more than the raw driving distance stats. And so I think strokes gained off the tee is something people will lean on and then maybe tilt that a little bit towards bombers. But I think that's another reason that I feel like Jason Day won't end up being overly popular, is just because his tee to green metrics aren't very strong. And people really lean on that, especially people who use sites like Fantasy National. They're really going to get those stats right there in your face. And so I think the strokes gained metrics will probably be more impactful over ownership than something like driving distance will. You're not going to see like a lot of ownership on a Ryan Fox or something like that.
Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with Ryan Fox. Let's keep his ownership down by not mentioning his name. But let's go to the 9K range, because I think this is going to be the toughest one to figure out after Justin Rose. Justin Rose, the highest owned player of the week or the second highest owned player of the week?
Unfortunately, I'm going to say the highest. I don't really know who you're referring to who might be the second.
I was going to say
DJ.
I was going to say Paul Casey is going to be second, but
I can see Rose, exceeding maybe 30% in the Millie Maker, which is a very scary thought with that many entries. And then the rest, I think it's going to be pretty even in like the high teens area for the 9K range with Rahm, Woods, and Brooks. Yeah,
how do you have it shaking out here, Colin? Like, I think that Rose, it just as a guess, like 29-30% for me.
Yeah, I've got him closer to 25 right now in the latest version of the projections. There's just so many other names here. I think it keeps it maybe in check a little bit. We haven't typically seen someone get to 30% in the past unless it's a really mispriced value golfer. There's so many names in the Millionaire Maker that people are going to want to rotate in and out of their lineups. So I think Rose and DJ will end up having pretty comparable ownership, but those are definitely going to be two very popular players to start your roster with. And then I think Rahm will get a little bit lost in the shuffle with Tiger and Brooks maybe ending up in the high teens, but below 20% ownership. Is
Tiger the toughest guy to predict when it comes to ownership?
He certainly used to be. When he was first coming back, it was a really big challenge. There was so much hype around him, so much excitement, and no data to really understand where it would be. Now we've at least seen him play in some of these events. We've seen the ownership come in, so it's a little bit easier. Some of the public field tournaments, U.S. Open, Masters, a little bit harder than the other weeks, but I feel decent with the Tiger numbers as long as the hype doesn't build. As soon as you get like the Tiger hype clips, then it starts to tick up, and next thing you know, it's at 20% or so.
All right, so let's give guesses for these final three here: Woods, Rahm, Woods, and Brooks. I'm gonna say 15% for Rahm.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I always factor in the Pat Mayo bump, so you got him to win, so I'm gonna say 15 to 17% is pretty good.
I'll go 12. I'll go lower on Rahm.
Oh, I like that a lot. Let's keep that. Yeah, don't play John Rahm. Just keep it right down there. Tiger, I'm just at a complete loss. Like, if you showed me the numbers from the morning and it was like 21%, I wouldn't be stunned. If it was 7%, I wouldn't be stunned. I actually think he comes in lower owned. He's probably the lowest owned guy of this tier, at least in my mind. Just because if Rose is there, Rahm is there, and Brooks is there, I don't know who's playing Tiger. Like, I'm not, so I'm going to say 11% for Tiger.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm not going to play Tiger. If he wins, it'd be awesome. I'll enjoy watching the U.S. Open regardless. So I'm going to say around that 10 to 12% is probably pretty solid.
Colin?
Yeah, I got him about 16% right now, a little bit below Koepka, who I have between 17 and 18%.
That's tough. I was going to say Brooks around, like 16%. He's a defending champ. He's been looking pretty good. Although, hey, it's funny, like, people are making this case against, like, Jason Day, and even Rahm to an extent. It's like, they're not hitting their irons very well. Like, neither is Brooks, ever since he's been coming back. Like, it's been a lot of off the tee. It's been a lot of putting. Not a whole lot of irons.
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough. Sorry, Colin. I just don't know if we have enough, like, stats to back. Yeah, guys, I don't think he's ranked, like, on the PGA Tour stats in terms of enough rounds accumulated to qualify for some of the stats. But the results are there, and I think last year's win is obviously going to give him a boost.
Yeah, what are you seeing, Colin?
It was just crazy last week. He was almost the same price as DJ, almost the same ownership, and then a week later, you're getting the $2,000 price discount on him. You're going to get maybe the same or lower ownership than he was last week. And yeah, it's a stronger field, but it just shows how inefficient people were last week as far as handling Brooks. I think that people still do lean on Vegas odds for making some of their decisions as well. And so Tiger is always inflated in that a little bit just because of the public loving to bet him. So I imagine the public's also going to like to play him in DFS. My model says Brooks will be higher owned, but my gut says Tiger will clip him by a little bit.
All right, so if we're talking about the chalk guys from $9,000 and above, like, we've really kind of identified Rose and DJ as the ones that are going to carry a lot of ownership up here, top 5 in overall ownership. Is there a point in ownership where you get to where you say, I'm not going to play one of these guys? Or does it matter at the top, and really fading chalk and pivoting off of some of these guys only matters at the bottom?
For me personally, and from my experience playing DraftKings, is that I tend to play chalk more than I like to admit. So at any point, I'm going to be overweight on DJ and on Rose. I'll probably be in the 35 to 40% type lineup with those guys. So I'm just going to be overweight regardless. I don't really have the stones to fade those two. All
right, so Colin, like, what if I don't want to outright fade DJ? I want to take an underweight position. Does that even make any sense, or should I just not play?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine. Like, the guys are kind of priced in the way that they should be on DraftKings. It's pretty efficient. The ownership seems like it's going to be pretty efficient. It doesn't seem like you're really going to win or lose with that decision. I know it from a results perspective, you're definitely going to win or lose, but from a process perspective, it doesn't feel like that. So I think you can go underweight on DJ if you want to. I think you can grab 15 or 20% and go out of your way to try to make sure that those lineups are built in a unique way, whether it's with another top tier golfer or by diversifying in the $7,000 range. I have no issues. Some people say that you kind of have to be overweight on somebody or not on him at all, and I don't really think that's the case.
All right, so in the 8K range, this is where we're going to start finding our differentiators when it comes to certain players. It really seems like, I do think that Paul Casey is the most underpriced player in this field. Like, if he was listed at the same price as Brooks, or let's say Brooks was $9,000, Tiger was $9,200, and Paul Casey was sandwiched in between John Rahm and Tiger Woods, like, people would still play Paul Casey at $9,300, and now he's just $8,000. I know he was dealing with the hip injury from the players and withdrew, and good on him for giving us early notice on that. Pulled out a complete 24 hours before so we could adjust those lineups. I've been watching the Insta clips of him practicing. He looks fine. He says he's fine. I like him for this type of setup. So I think that he's going to come in like top 5 ownership when all is said and done. Like, he could be plus 20%, but it seems like Fleetwood is gaining steam on him too. Both those guys, I think, project out to be around 20-ish%. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, those seem like fair percentages. I was a little surprised as Fleetwood just kept continuing to build steam. I thought we were going to see Casey as the highest owned guy. I thought he was going to hit 30%, but the Tommy Fleetwood hype train started rolling. And I'm glad because that makes it so I can still play Casey. I think he is definitely still in play for tournaments at 20%. I probably won't have a lot of Fleetwood at that same ownership level. I think there's always a chance that the models are wrong and, maybe people just end up slamming Casey anyways. But the presence of Fleetwood there is definitely nice because it was going to get a little bit out of control. Like you said, $9,000 price tag on Casey. I'm still playing him in DFS.
Eric, who are you seeing as the third most owned from the 8K range?
Third most. I think you might have to jump back up to the top and go with Henrik Stenson.
I think it's Stenson or Grace.
Yeah, I can agree with that. This is kind of a dead range. There's going to be a lot of guys who are going to be under-owned, maybe even linger in the 5% range with Hideki and Sergio. So I think this is definitely an area within the pricing where you're going to be able to find some leverage. And there's a lot of win equity within this group. Stenson, I mean, like we just said, he is going to be a little higher owned, but I still think he's probably got one of the better shots to win this thing.
Yeah, Stenson rates out really well for me. Like when I did my power rankings, DJ Rose and Justin Thomas are the top three, and then like Casey was super high. And then Stenson was super high too, but I think I might fade Stenson here, get away from some of the ownership, only because what you mentioned, there are guys that I can use to differentiate my lineups in this range that I like close to as much. Like Colin, Patrick Reed, Hideki, even Bryson at this point is now getting no love, which I find kind of shocking.
Yeah, those guys are going to be single-digit ownership. I think Sergio is also going to be single-digit ownership just because his form has not been there, especially in the short term. And Bryson as well. I know the pricing on Bryson this week was nice in the way that they could have put him at 7,700, and I think he would have, only been $600 cheaper, but been, 3 times the ownership level. So he is going to fly under the radar at that price point. I think maybe Phil will get ahead of Grace a little bit just with the name value there and the Vegas odds, but it's going to be pretty close between those guys and Henrik for whoever is right behind Fleetwood and Casey, who are definitely going to be 1 and 2 for highest owned in this range.
It's funny with Bryson because he does rate out really well, although he probably rigged the model. So who even knows with him? But when I spoke with Leone and Raza on the Giant DraftKings show, I was almost in the all-out fade position on Bryson because I thought he would carry the most ownership after Casey here. And I felt like I couldn't have the top 2 guys. But if he's going to come in single digits, all of a sudden I'm starting to like Bryson all over again. Like, I thought he might touch 20% coming off a win. I guess his name just doesn't register in this range, or is everyone kind of feeling the same thing that, oh, I think he's going to be too highly owned. He's slightly overpriced. I just can't take him now.
You talking to me?
Yeah, I'm talking to both of you.
So I would say for Bryson specifically, I think obviously models and projections and content providers do drive a lot of ownership as well. And I think most people are in the same place maybe that we are, where it's really hard to project him because the last season and the end of it was not great. And he's been up and down this season, and definitely a lot more up of late than down. But I think that is why people who play off projection systems are a little bit gun shy. And I think that's why you're definitely going to get him at sub 10%. I know strokes gain metrics are all really solid, but I just think he's like, from a appeal perspective, he's not quite up there with these big names, and people love him when he's $500 cheaper.
I mean, he has been pretty consistent. He had a withdraw at one point, but he has made 10 cuts in a row.
Yeah. I mean, this year, I think like a lot of the models look longer than that, right? So they're looking at the last 2 years or things like that as a time point. And he definitely has, he's young. He's on the upward trajectory of the aging curve, but sometimes that stuff's tough to account for. And I know that's something that we've struggled with at times.
All right, so if we play the highest own from $7,500 to $8,000, I'm thinking Cantlay, Kuchar, and Finau would be my 3 guesses of the top owned guys. What are you seeing, Colin?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Webb Simpson, I have kind of right there with Cantlay. I don't know if I would take a bet on either side of that one. So I do think that Kuchar and Finau are going to eat up a good chunk of the ownership. Could see them both kind of being close to 15%, maybe getting towards 20%, depending how the week progresses. Just so much security, and especially Kuchar has been such a cash game staple, and Finau too in DFS for so long that a lot of that ownership will bleed into the tournaments.
All right, so what are we thinking about, like, the pivot plays from this area? Like, Charles looks like no one's going to own Charles whatsoever. And, I mean, I bet him to win, like, a few weeks ago because I thought he was, like, getting better. And he was such a disaster last week. I don't even know if I can squeeze him into a lineup right now. But I like Keegan Bradley here, and I like Alex Noren. And Noren's a weird one. Like, do you think he gets over under 10%, Eric, on Alex Noren?
I'll go under. I don't think we've seen enough of him recently. He went kind of back to Europe there, played decent over there, actually. So I just... With Casey and Fleetwood right there, I just don't think people are going to have the balls to click Noren over him. And then either way, they're just going to drop down to Kuchar and save that $300. So under 10%.
Over under 10%, Colin?
Under. Just barely, but I think under 10%. I think under 10% for Scott and Leishman as well.
Out of those three, which one would you rather play? Because I think the clear answer is Noren.
I think Leishman, then Noren for me, but it's not a clear answer. I would definitely take whatever I could get as far as an ownership discount.
I almost jumped in and said Scott out of those three. So
okay, so I guess this is what's leading to all this diversified ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Scott's just been a train wreck with his putter recently. I know he had those like 2 rounds where he gained strokes. Everyone was really pumped. The tee to green stuff is really strong though, and so you can kind of bank on one of two things. Either one, you hope that the U.S. Open just turns into a ball striker fest and the putting doesn't matter at all. Or two, you hope he gets lucky. So I guess you have 2 outs if you play Scott, but then you obviously have the third outcome, which is an ejection with a painful putting performance.
People have really soured on Xander, despite having a skill set that you would think would match up with the U.S. Open a lot, but just, now he's Xander cursed, which somehow Tim rated him as second most likely person to win this tournament, which is just insane. Hence the insane person label. But he's like, I have him around like 3% right now, but it's a guy right above him that I find really, really interesting because I can't get a grasp on him whatsoever. But whenever I look back at like some like tournaments where both these guys kind of play well, like if Brendan Grace is playing really well in a tournament, Cameron Smith tends to play well in that same tournament. And he has sort of a U.S. Open-y type game. Like, he's not a super long hitter. He's not super accurate, but he's kind of decent at both. Immaculate short game. And he can hit his long irons pretty well, too. And, like, I have him coming in at close to 1%.
1% seems fair. It's 1% too much for me. No, a million maker dart throw, I guess it's there. But, like, Daniel Berger's there for 1% also. I think long-term he's a better player. But I think they're justified in being 1% owned.
Yeah, I'll let you take the 1% there, Pat.
He's
lost a ton of strokes in approach.
Yeah, he's been awful since the Masters, like legit awful. But I mean, I know Berger had the 2 wins at the St. Jude, and he kind of hit the scene a little bit more. But I just looking back at like major performances, Smith's been better than Berger.
How often is Cam Smith going to show up and be the guy, like the low-owned kind of sleeper pick in back-to-back majors? I don't see it. I
don't know, but like even at Chambers Bay, he was top 5. He was top 5 at the Masters this year. Like. Maybe he just gears his games up for I don't know what it is with him. It's just, I think that he has the overall collection of skills. I mean, right now he's not hitting his irons, like you mentioned. He's not driving the ball well, although he finally got back in the positives at Memorial, despite losing strokes everywhere else. But I don't know, there's just something with him that if he comes in at this low of ownership, that I think that if you want to take like a dart throw, he's at least, in my mind, a logical dart throw. Better than like one of these losers who's like 6,600.
You don't have to have a lot of him to be overweight, if you're maybe a couple lineups here and there. But with Finau there and Schauffele, and I guess Berger as well, but I think Schauffele is actually going to gain some traction just because of the name, his result from last year, and the thought that he is a bomber, and that's kind of how Shinnecock's going to play.
What do you got for Louis, Colin?
Louis is a tough one. I actually have a decently high ownership projection. It'll be close to 10% by the time we publish our next round. And that was a little bit high for me. Always feel like I like Louis when he's flying under the radar. Don't like him as much if people are talking about him. There's just so many names here that I don't think that Xander will end up getting ownership, even with the hype, just because you can pay a couple $100 more to get to that range with Webb Simpson, Cantlay, Kuchar, Molinari coming off the win on the European Tour, and he has the strokes gain metrics as well. And then Keegan's another guy that is long and accurate off the tee and is right now one of the best approach players in the game. And so I think all of those names will kind of keep the ownership away from Xander. Louis is just a tough one. You could tell me 5%, you could tell me 15%. My model says close to 10, but
yeah, you see your model's taking the hedge route here.
yeah, exactly. And I'm offering pretty boring takes to go alongside it.
Yeah, but I mean, you can say they're boring takes, but like we talked about at the Master Show, they were incredibly accurate takes. So that's probably more beneficial to the people than real hot takes.
So I probably won't end up playing Louis at that price tag at 10% ownership. I would have interest in him if it dropped to the 5 level, but no, none for me, and no Charles for me, even at 4% or wherever he ends up. Just seems like he's way overpriced.
Well, I kind of dug myself a hole and got into the Keegan game.
I saw that.
Yeah, well, sometimes your emotions get too much. And like now I'm stuck playing them, so go Keegan. I guess all my what I would have had in Charles shares, I'm not just gonna have in Keegan shares, or maybe I'll move some more onto Norin and be on my way.
Sometimes it works out well though. I got stuck on the fade Joel Dahman game last week, and it ended up working out pretty well for me. So maybe you'll sweep those boys in the Keegan head-to-heads.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Just as long as Molinari comes in last place, I'm just gonna be very, very happy about this entire thing. But 7K from 7,500 to 7,000. Well, actually, before we get to that, what did you have for Finau's ownership? I had 17%.
Yeah, it's at 15 now and creeping up by the day.
What do you think?
I won't argue with either of those. That sounds about right.
So if we drop down to that next level here, you got like Wise, Fitzpatrick, Snedeker, Walker, a bunch of guys no one wants to play. Who's the actual chalk from down here? Because the guys that I've been hearing hyped, realistically, Jimmy Walker, Kyle Stanley, Cabrera Bello, maybe Luke List if people listen to me, but people don't listen to me, and Luke List is like the only guy I'm consistently like, hey, Luke List is actually good and constantly underpriced. People are like, he doesn't win, so he sucks. You know, he's top 10 in DraftKings point average for the year, which I found really surprising. But Griot, Stanley, Walker, Rafa Cabrera Bello. Those are the 4 guys that I see carrying potentially double-digit ownerships.
I think Griot for sure is going to be one of the higher owned guys. Talk to me about Walker. So here's what I was trying to figure out. He popped as being highly owned in my model, which has been pretty good for the most part throughout the course of the season. And it really surprised me. And one of the things I know drives it is the fan share tags. And I was wondering, are people talking about Jimmy Walker because they want to play him? Or are they talking about him because of the whole cheating with the ball and providing a backstop thing that was going on Twitter the other day?
No, I think he rates out pretty well in the models, and then like if people search by POA only, he's probably, I believe he's ranked first in POA putting over the past 24 rounds. We've seen him play in like disastrous conditions at a long course at Torrey Pines before and play really well there. He has a win on POA in the past in Texas during windy conditions. The one problem I have with Jimmy Walker is the off the tee stuff is bad. To say the least. And if he's just in the fescue the entire time, like he scores really well on par 4s. The putting's been really good. The approaches are getting better. He's good around the greens. But if he can't drive the ball, he's kind of screwed, isn't he?
It doesn't seem like it's a great way to go this week. I think I'll end up with no Walker. You're basically telling me that my model's probably right. He's probably going to be 10 to 13% owned. And at that level, I'd just rather pivot off of him. I think the 7K range is a great range to pivot. Like you said, there's so many options here. If any of them are going to grab ownership, you might as well get off those and find basically the same golfer at half the ownership. Yeah,
that's what you did with Dahman. Like, can you explain the Dahman thing from last week?
Yeah. So we had Dahman rated as an okay value in the projection model. I think we had him 15% to T20 or something, but his ownership was getting out of control. And so I went on a little bit of a rant about Dahman chalk week. And if you can't fade Dahman as chalk, then like really you're just saying you don't care about ownership at all. And I ended up betting 12 different guys head-to-head versus Dahman. And Dahman hit his floor and missed the cut, finished +3. And so I went 11-0-1 on the Dahman head-to-head props. But I just thought it was egregious for him to be that high owned in a field where he basically was just the same golfer as so many guys priced right near him. I feel like that's the same way with Walker if his ownership gets up there.
Well, I mean, Walker's been generating these high-end performances despite not hitting, like, he's gained strokes off the tee at every, like, less than driver course. So, like, Byron Nelson, he came 6th, but lost almost 2 strokes off the tee. At Valero, another driver course, he came 4th and lost a stroke and a half off the tee. At Fort Worth, he gained. At the Players, he gained because he didn't have to use driver. But if you go back and look at it, he hasn't missed a cut since the Genesis, and he has 5 consecutive top 20s. Like, I think there is momentum building for Jimmy Walker here. I actually like him more as a bet than a DraftKings play. I think that's if you want to hedge yourself out, like to get away from some of that ownership, where if you need to own 10% of Jimmy Walker, 12% just to match the field, just bet him at 100 to 1 and move on and just like diversify those shares elsewhere.
Yeah, take your each way bet, and I think I saw Jeff bet him at 100, so that makes a lot of sense at 100 to 1. I'm not a big Jimmy Walker guy just because of that kind of sporadic driving, and especially this week, it's if you're in the rough, you're fighting for a par right away.
Well, is that why Griot is going to end up at such chalk ownership despite being the late add to the field column? Because I think that those guys generally do go under owned.
Yeah, usually they do go under owned. I think they did a pretty good job getting him in the pool early this week, and I think there's a little bit, people have always liked him, or at least he's been kind of popular at DFS over the last 6 weeks or so. So I think all of that kind of compounds it. I would also say in general that the DFS field is a little sharper now than it might have been a couple of years ago. And people seem to pick up on things like that a lot quicker than they used to. Just the same way people seem to be a lot more comfortable playing European Tour players. And so those were things that in the past you might have got free ownership discounts that I don't think you get anymore.
So Walker, Stanley, Griot, Rafa, Cabrera, Mayo. Is that who you have projected as your top 4 in ownership?
It's Walker, Griot are definitely 1 and 2, and then a lot of guys that are kind of coming out the same. Snedeker, Ian Poulter, Kyle Stanley, Luke List, Rafa. They're all kind of in that 7 to 10% range where, I could easily be off by 1% or 2. And you could tell me, one guy's gonna be higher than the other. I wouldn't fight you over it. I think all of those names are going to carry, enough ownership that they'll be somewhat popular, but also be spread out enough that you're not going to have to go out of your way to fade like a 20% number.
Yeah, so there's no one so chalky that you'll be like, hey, that number's ridiculous. There's no Joel Dommins this week is what you're saying.
No, I mean, I guess Jimmy Walker at 13% seems too high just because there's probably 8 or 10 guys that are about the same as him, but we like him. I think we have him 20% to T20. Not sure what his betting odds are, so I don't know if we consider that a plus EV bet, but it doesn't seem like it's a outlandish line to bet him, and he seems like a better bet than a DFS play.
Eric, do you think that any of the known commodities in this range carry more ownership than people think, like Hoffman, Duffner, Snedeker, those types of guys?
I mean, I wish Snedeker wasn't involved in that group, but I could see it. There's people talking about his U.S. Open track record, and that's going to bump.
Can I throw some throw the blanket on the Snedeker fire right now? Did anyone see how he did well last week? It wasn't by driving or hitting irons.
Putting.
It was by putting and chipping. And
I saw a chip in, chip off the flag and all that.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's going to carry over. I get it that he plays again that year that I talked about with. Jimmy Walker at Torrey Pines. Snedeker won that year. He can actually play well on long courses, but I don't think that his game is close to what it was back then.
Yeah, I was wondering if Zach Johnson will carry ownership. We have him projected pretty low right now, but he's one of the names that in the more public events and majors of the past, he's carried, 15 or 20% ownership. We have him below 5% at the moment. I don't know if you guys feel like that is an accurate number just because his form isn't there, or if people still kind of view him as a steady cut maker that they can plug in down low.
I have him at 6% right now, but I think if people are looking at driving distance and you couple that with form, plus his track record at the U.S. Open isn't great. So, yeah, I think that 5-6% is probably where he's going to end up coming. Do you think that he carries more?
Yeah, I agree with that. He's not the sexiest play, and people are going to be jumping towards, like I said before, it's going to be the driving distance narrative that's going to drive some ownership in with these cheaper guys. So I think Zach Johnson's going to get overlooked for sure. All
right, 6K guys. From what I'm seeing, it's pretty definitive who the owned players are going to be from down here. I have Charles Howell pushing 15%, which is kind of hilarious. Gary Woodland at 9%. Brennan Steele closing in from 10 to 12%. And that's really it. Those are the three guys that have really leapt off the page to me in terms of carrying ownership. Ben Ann, maybe, but he was such a late ad that I might actually take any Woodland shares that I had and just play Ben Ann double than just play no Gary Woodland. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, all those names are on my radar. I think Steve Stricker also carry a little bit of ownership as well. I'm not sure Howell will get to 15% just because I think so many people are going to hit that mid 7K range that we talked about for a while. So I think Howell, though, 8 to 10% seems like the number that I have him at.
Anyone else you can see from down here?
At first look, not at all. Like I said, Benny Ann, the late ad, and it's pretty cheap price for someone who showed up 2 weeks ago at the Memorial. So I could see him kind of taking away some steals, some Woodland ownership. But I think you nailed it on the head there.
Well, if we just talk about sleepers from down in this range, because if you're going to play Dustin, or if you want to do like a contrarian Dustin build and like my Dustin Rom lineup, like I had to start digging to the very low 7s and into the $6,000 area. And if I'm going to do that, it's tough to just eat the chalk on all of it. So are there any players from down here that you guys actually like that you think are kind of sneaky? Because I'm starting to buy in like the Dylon Fratelli buzz just a little bit. I just like how he hits the ball off the tee. Beef Johnson has made tees 2-2 in cuts at the U.S. Open, and Eric, you and I were talking about him just before we got on air that T12, T2, T12, miscut, made cut. Like I think that he's popular among people that just really focus on golf, but like there's no way he's coming in at more than like 2% ownership. Is it, Colin?
No, I don't think so. It's not a name that people are comfortable enough with, and people in general are going to avoid this range, even if they have to play DJ, they're going to go to the couple names that we mentioned, and they're not going to be comfortable taking flyers on some of the guys they haven't heard of. I think kind of in that same price point, I think that Lucas Glover is another guy that if he's the cheapest guy on your roster, I think you could do a lot worse. He's close to the minimum price on both sides, DraftKings and FanDuel. And,
I don't know what that is.
And 16% odds to T20 for Glover. I don't know. People like Tee to Green game, obviously a former U.S. Open champion. I think you mentioned earlier, but I think we glossed over it. For DraftKings, the scoring is going to be so impacted by the place points and who wins the event because there aren't going to be that many birdies and bogeys. So I don't think you need a lot more than a made cut out of your last golfer. And so someone like Glover, I think, is worth a flyer.
Do you have any will you play like any Ryan Fox shares, any Sung Jae Im shares, Dean Burmeister shares, anything like that? Like how many lineups would you have to play before you started throwing darts at those guys?
I mean, I would need like 450 lineups or something. I'm not going to play any guys like that. I usually cut it off at guys who kind of have a 15% chance to finish inside of the top 20. It's usually roughly a 55% chance to make the cut. That's kind of where I clip things, and I'd rather get maybe 5 to 10% of those plays than I would to grab like 1% each of the Ryan Fox or Matt Wallace or Beef Johnsons of the world.
How about a guy who is a late add to the field, hits a ton of fairways, gains strokes off the tee normally, very good around the greens too, and once ran down Dustin Johnson at Pebble Beach. TPJ!
The lefty.
Ted Potter Jr., the lefty. I bet him as top lefty. 12-1 over the other losers at the top. But he comes in with 5 straight cuts made. Like, he's not terrible. You got no love for TPJ?
I just have no feel on Ted Potter Jr. I don't know. I can't even find him on this sheet, to be honest.
$6,500. Okay, what about Piercy, who every statistical model loves? Like,
his
putters just throw it in the trash. He'd be great in the scramble.
Are you taking any shots from down here, Eric?
Personally, yeah, I will. I'm intrigued by Harold Varner. He had a pretty decent week. I think it might have been the Memorial or last week, but he lost a ton of strokes putting. Your boy Sung Jae Im. I mean, these are like 1%, 2% plays, one lineup here and there. But
no, these are less than 1% plays, I think.
Sam Burns, that's a name he cleaned up at his qualifier. That's a kind of a name that's going to get some buzz, but again, not exceeding 1%. 600 or 6,000 range is kind of ugly. I like a lot of guys actually in the 7,000 range with like Ross Fisher, maybe a little Hadley, but maybe not too much. Hadwin as well. Some of those guys could garner some attention.
Yeah, are there any just completely under-owned guys from any range, Colin, that you do like here this week?
So in this range, we actually straight up like Steve Stricker. Like even at
but when do you guys not like Steve Stricker?
I mean, so I was going like another level deeper because this week it's like, oh my God, even me, I'm like Steve Stricker, this old man, this huge course. It's going to be really tough. Like, what has Steve Stricker done at majors over the last few years? So I went digging to try to basically decide whether or not like Steve Stricker or Charles Howell was a better play. And Stricker's record in majors and at the Players Championship over the past few years is pretty solid. It's went 23rd, 54th, 37th, 16th, 41st, 16th, 42nd, 4th, 30th, 38th, 28th. Hasn't missed a cut. And those are all the hardest courses and the hardest, fields that you're going to have on tour. So I think that there is merit to playing Stricker. I don't think that he can finish inside the top 5. I don't think he really has that upside. But to make the cut, to play the weekend, to kind of survive and try to make pars, I actually think that, it's justified.
You know who, and this is the problem when you run data models and do everything like that, is who kind of really pops up for me and is just, I don't know if I can play him or not? Russell Knox.
Yeah, that's a scary one, but I think we have him like close to 15% to T20, maybe a little bit below, but I think 1%, like he could probably be a 1% guy that is actually has, a viable path to finishing inside the top 20. And obviously like the form of the past year has not been there, but you kind of know that something is there from the previous seasons that he had in his career.
Yeah, and the off the tee stuff and the approaches are back with him now too. If he's going to be like 1.5%. I'm just thinking about all my Gary Woodland shares. And like I didn't want to play Gary Woodland, then I got talked into Gary Woodland. Now I want to be off Gary Woodland again. So, and I don't know if I want to play, like if I have Howell projected at 15, like Colin says, that might be a bit high. Maybe he's probably going to be double digits though, right? Is that what you're thinking?
I think like 8 to 10, yeah, sounds about right.
So if
he's done nothing. Like for a guy who plays as much golf as he does, he very rarely qualifies for majors. And when he's there, I was looking at him too, like I said, over the past few years, I don't think he's finished inside the top 50 out of a major, and he hasn't qualified for many for a guy that makes a lot of money finishing inside the top 20 on tour.
Yeah, he hasn't played the U.S. Open since 2012, which is kind of crazy. So Russell Knox last 3 trips to the U.S. Open, 45th, 23rd, and missed the cut last year, but that was, Aaron Hill's just turned it to be a bomber's course, like absolutely, like far more than even if we're targeting distance this time around. It's not going to play like Aaron Hill's did. We're just, hey, hit your driver as much as you want, spray it wherever you want, you're going to be fine. Like, I think his accuracy and his iron play and his par 4 scoring really can come into this. It's just, can he putt? Ever?
It's a good question. I have no real feel for Knox. I'm kind of thinking as we talk about this that there's going to be guys here that if the wind does pick up, they're going to end up on the good side of the draw. And I don't have all the tee times memorized, but there's going to be some guys in here that you're not looking at that are going to be playing with no wind on Friday that you're just going to end up targeting.
Like Sebastian Munoz?
Maybe not Munoz, but Thorbjorn Olsen, he just won on the Euro Tour. Again, don't know the tee times, but I saw that Richie Wierenski gained over 8 shots and approach shots last week at the St. Jude, so that's another name who's kind of playing decent. But yeah, these are sprinkles here and there is all you're going to get out of me.
Yeah, so if you were to play guys down in this range, Colin, what do you think like a good exposure to set to them? If you were to play 10 lineups, is one lineup good enough?
Yeah, one lineup would definitely be good enough. I think kind of 10%, 15% on the high end, I think would probably be a decent level. You're basically looking at guys who really at best have 15% top 20 odds. So I think that's kind of a fair place to kind of cap your exposure if you want to do it systematically. But sometimes even half of that, yeah, I think 5 to 10% is probably fine.
I'm going to look more into the weather tomorrow since we're going to be closer to the event on the live chat at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Plus, I'll be on demand after the fact on the audio podcast feed if that's what you want to listen to. But how much influence, Colin, are you going to put in on the weather? Are you going to track it to see if something actually opens up? Or is it just going to be one of these things where even on Thursday morning, it's going to be really difficult to tell what the weather's actually going to do on Friday?
It might be difficult to tell what it'll do on Friday. You'll have at least a little clarity about Thursday. I'm definitely going to track it. I set up a little spreadsheet. I'll share it with you, friend of the Daily Roto crew, tracking kind of the differences in both the sustained wind and the gusts for the various tee times. So right now it looks like there's kind of a a 6 mile per hour on average difference that you would get if you went off in the best time, which is kind of the later Friday wave, versus the worst time, which is going off, as early as you can on Friday. And so I think that is material, especially when the pricing on DraftKings is so efficient in a lot of ways. So it's a nice way to kind of break the ties. And like you said, in some of the smaller field contests with more regs, I think a lot of people are going to be talking about the weather, but in the Millionaire Maker, I don't think it's going to move the needle a ton.
Are you going to structure lineups this way, Eric?
It's something I'm going to look into for sure, and probably build my lineups late on Wednesday. But mainly for the lower tier type guys. Like, I'm trying to gain like that. If it's a 2-stroke win, then that's going to make or break someone's cut or not. And I think that's crucial for the cut where it's only top 60 in ties. So I think on these dart throws, any stroke here and there is going to be a huge advantage.
All right, final thing. Does a 5 of 6 lineup have any chance of winning the Millionaire Maker?
I have no experience.
0.001%. I think if you somehow hit like a log jam where there's like 4 guys who are tied for second place and you've got all those guys in a miscut, then maybe you could do it. But no, for the most part, it's not going to happen. What have we seen it like happen maybe once where a 5 of 6 lineup was inside the top 5 at one of these?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would take someone who's super low owned for it to happen.
I think it was like close maybe with like Hao Tong Lee or something like that at the Open Championship.
Oh yeah, that would make a lot of sense. But I think there was one earlier this year where the 5 of 6 won like the big $4 5. I think it's when Ted Potter won. That just, he was like 0.2% owned. That like whoever had him, boom, you got it that week. But
yeah.
but
so
if
there's like 1,000 to 1 chance maybe of something like that happening. So I guess it's viable, but
like a 5 of 6 can cash pretty well in this though, I'm thinking.
Place points are going to matter a ton, especially if the weather's bad and the scores are high. The place points at the US Open matter more than any event on tour, especially in cash games. I definitely think people should be valuing the place points, but in tournaments, don't sell yourself short either. You could cash with a 3 of 6 lineup. I think you could have a decent cash with a 4 of 6 if you happen to get the winner and the second place guy.
All right. Any final thoughts here, Eric, going into it? Who's your pick to win?
I'm leaning Justin Rose, unfortunately, but Stenson's starting to draw my attention. I just read that, he leads the tour in driving accuracy and strokes gain approach, which I think are just going to be absolutely crucial this week. So I'm still deciding between Rose and Stenson.
Yeah, I know you guys have him highly rated at Daily Roto in the data golf model, Colin, but other than Stenson, who would you pick to win?
Yeah, I mean, DJ is definitely the favorite to win. We love Rose as well. We love the chalk this week, unfortunately. But I think my final thought would be that it's easier to predict what the field's going to do for ownership than it is to predict how the golfers are going to do. And so don't overestimate your ability to predict golfers. Definitely look for leverage and try to find ways to separate yourself from the field and let other people kind of make mistakes playing too much chalk in the same lineup.
All right, let's get out of here. Colin, once again, tell everyone where they can find your work and about the Daily Roto product.
Yeah, you can check out me on Twitter at Drewby417. You can find all of our stuff over at Daily Roto, projections, probabilities, ownership projections. Got a lot of golf betting tools as well, head-to-head tools, 3-ball tools, top 20 tools, all over at Daily Roto, and save 20% this week with the promo DAD.
If I'm not a father, am I still eligible to use the discount code?
Current dads, people who are trying to avoid becoming dads, everybody is welcome to use the DAD code.
All right, EP, where they can find you?
Twitter, EPAT Golf on the Score app. I highly suggest downloading it. You can follow golfers. They'll send you push notifications if he's making birdies, bogeys. Probably not a lot of birdies this week, but monitor your golfers that way.
Top Canadian bet, Hadwood minus 200. That's the bet?
Best bet of the week.
You don't think that Garrett Rank beats him?
Great story. Don't think he beats him.
It's not a great story. It's a stupid story. I hate hearing about it. I hate it. I really wish he didn't qualify.
Canada media's got to me already. Yeah, that's a pretty strong bet. Go Hadwin.
I like it. If you can parlay him up with TPJ top lefty, now you're in business. 12 to 1. I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me at the PME on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. My betting cheat sheet will come out after the live chat on Wednesday on my Facebook page, so check that out. I'm going to update the DK cheat sheet now that it's 4 days later. I know a bit more about ownership, weather, everything like that. Some new names will pop in and out, and do not be afraid to become a member. FantasyNational.com today. Major week is the time to do it. A lot of money at stake, whether it's on the DraftKings market, whether it is on the betting market. You can use the tools to your advantage and really cut down your research time. There's no picks on the site. It's just tools for you to do your own research and come up with your own picks and your own sleepers. People really seem to like it. FantasyNational.com. Check it out. Even on a weekly, you can do that today. I'm Pat Mayo. Check out all the content. Enter the giveaways, which I mentioned at the top of the show. And for the love of fucking Christ, do not fucking quote tweet stuff at me anymore. It's pissing me off. Anyway, you're ineligible for the draw if you do that anyway. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!